Yeah, welcome all. Good morning. So we have our next speaker, Miss Laila Edge.
Okay, well, literally, I'm used to speaking. I'm used to being on a stage, and I'm used on feeding on people's energies and enthusiasm and how everything goes. Because that way, I know that I'm speaking to you, and that you feel like, hey, this is actually interesting, and I'm engaged and I'm listening. Because funny enough, we actually only have the capacity to listen consciously for 20 minutes. So if I know that you're engaged and you're listening, then I can speak better. Then I can speak to what actually captivates and engages you. Uh, it's very different in an online way, because obviously you're not there, and I'm essentially speaking into to myself. It looks like for me, it's very. I would love it. I would invite you to in the chat room. Just okay. Topic. Thank you. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's now I know. You're wondering what am I going to speak about? Well, I'm going to speak about how to be certain in an uncertain world, and in the theme of the psychological safety of um, remote teams, then essentially you have a lot of uncertainty. You have to place a lot of trust, and it's very different from when you're seeing people actually going into an office and you're interacting physically. Yes, sometimes that does. If you place that, so the question I got there, does having a slide provide a psychological safety for a speaker? Yes, sometimes it does. And that's why you have what is commonly known as death by PowerPoint slide. You have far too much information packed in because you're worried that you're going to miss a point. Um, Speaking is considered as a real psychological fear, and it's the I believe it is the fear, even higher than death, that people just do not want to be there and talk on stage or in front of a lot of people. It makes them feel uncomfortable, and they rather die than do that. So if it wasn't for the expectation that actually you would have had the slide, then obviously it would have been a very different conversation. I very much prefer more of a conversational style speaking than necessarily 20 minutes um, and then asking questions at the end. So that's the reason why I'm saying if you want to interact in the chat room, then please do. And if you don't, that's absolutely fine as well. So first of all, so the presentation I'm speaking about is how to be certain in an uncertain world. And really, this is about in the context of the psychological safety of remote teams. So really, we are just in a pandemic or out of a pandemic, depends on where you are in the world. Um, and the pandemic has created an environment where we actually feel really, really uncertain. And what happens there is that actually our identity, our roles, our structures, and essentially our livelihood perhaps feels threatened. So how can we feel psychologically safe? Right. Just a brief introduction to me, so you know why I'm speaking on this subject. So I created and I run a change in communications consultancy. And for the past 20 odd years, I've been working in various organizations, large organizations like Cable and Wireless, Virgin Media, um, working using process frameworks and other methodologies, COBIT, ITIL, using Agile with developers team. And and really just about implementing and launching products and so on. Throughout this period of time of doing this, what I realized that the big stumbling block to a successful launch is really not the systems themselves. It is actually much more about the people. One of the things that we need to consider when we talk about uncertainty, most people like to know what's actually happening there. Most people like to know that they're actually got the slides available ready, and that everything is working. And when that doesn't happen, then there is a stress, because all of a sudden things are not performing or acting as per your expectations. What that then leads to is the fact that it threatens your identity. So if you're seen as someone that is perhaps a perfectionist, that really, really thinks and places your importance on making everything go smooth, then perhaps the way that we started my presentation here didn't seem very smooth. But on the other hand, if you can look at, okay, it's only emotions. It's only an emotion, this stress and fear. And what we do is that we can then just observe internally what is actually happening. So I could have said, okay, well, you know what, I'm leaving because, you know, this is not for me. Or I could have panicked in a different way. Or I could have completely ignored it. So I dealt with it the way I dealt with it. And that's the point, that when we feel threatened, we actually feel threatened because it means something to you by the fact that something is not happening. If you do not have a job, then how can you provide as the head of the family? How can you so all of those threats creates a behavior, and with that behavior, that's what people see. So then that's what people are interacting with. So if you're looking at, for example, remote teams and managing remote teams before the pandemic, then actually some of the problems were the same as we've seen now. Isolation, no interaction with people, fear of not being in the loop about things. Whereas now you had with the pandemic, you had the problem of perhaps your job is not secure. Perhaps your family is around, and now you're, you know, there's a lot going on, and how you handle those emotions is very key. But also, it may be that others are exhibiting behaviors that you don't necessarily have expected it to. My speak is about how to be certain in an uncertain world, and part of it is being able to recognize that there are 3 principles that you can, is to recognize that what is it that we're placing certainty in. Because the more things that we're placing certainty on the outside, then the problem is going to be that you're triggered and then you behave in a stressful way. One of the things, so 3 principles behind being more certain is acknowledge the fact that there are certain things that are invisible, like thoughts and feelings, that actually drives our behaviors, that actually drives how we then communicate and act in a remote team. The second principle is that believe that we can actually choose to control our thoughts and feelings. Now, there is a difference between controlling your thoughts and feelings versus suppressing your thoughts and feelings. And finally, the third principle is that what we focus on grows. So if we focus on our problems or perceived problems, then actually we are going to continuously produce more of that. So 5 things that will help you become more certain by placing importance on these 5 things is the next bit that I want to introduce. Okay, so the first thing is actually communicate or communication. And I've added there that this is about communicating with edge. So I asked somebody the other day, what is communication in the context of remote teams? And they said, well, surely it's about exchanging information, and you do it via emails, or you do it via calls, or in a Zoom environment, or the likes. And I said, well, yes, but that's the things that you can see. Communication is so much more than just that, because the tone, the way I speak, the body language, all of these are going to matter how you communicate and you transfer or trying to convey your message to the other party. And the thing we keep on neglecting, I think the previous speaker spoke about introspection. Well, that is actually very, very powerful. So the introspection is what I would call the inner communication. So how you speak to yourself, what thoughts are you actually producing inside of you right now? And how is that helping you or serving you when it comes to actually communicating with others? So actually taking the time out to think about that, that's important. And that's, if we can place more certainty on that communication, that is going to help you. So essentially, you know, the same word can mean different things for different people because of different roles. And all of this is because of the inner voice, the inner communication we have with it ourselves. That means that it drives a certain behavior. And as you can see, it then manifests in a different way. And this is one of the things that I've seen very much in my dealings, is the fact that just because I've written an email and sent it doesn't mean that the receiver has received it. Doesn't mean that they've actually read it. Doesn't mean they have understood it. And this is the part of the problem. You as a sender, as a person that's communicating, need to take the responsibility on to say, I'm going to check, have you actually understood this communication? So what I'm going to ask you right now, that in the chat, is if you are actually if you're actually following me at the moment and you're finding value in what I'm saying, please can you type in a yes? Fantastic. Okay, so I'm getting some yeses there. You see, this is communication. The next pillar, place your certainty into what I would call your strategy, not the tactics. So Jeff Bezos says very famously, be stubborn on your vision, but flexible on the details. So the thing here is really about, if you are so concerned about the next steps and you're only looking down and you're looking down on your feet and you're taking the next step, you do not know in which direction that next step is taking you. If you look up and look at and focus on what it is that you want to achieve, then you know where to take the next step and you don't have to look down. Now, that is very philosophical. I appreciate that. But the point is, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Asking yourself that when you feel like you're in a stumbling block, asking yourself that when you feel like somebody's blocking you when you're trying to do something, helps you understand what's important. And then you're not being petty, you're not micromanaging, you're actually allowing people to do what they need to do. I appreciate the time. So next one is, next slide. Right, compassion instead of judgment. The reason why this is here is that if you place your certainty on being right, you're placing a judgment. And yes, he behaved right, and therefore, you know, I trust him, and so on. But if you can come from a place of compassion, then essentially you have much more to play with. You are actually able to use the potential of a person, and you are going to be much more flexible. And that will give you resources, internal resources, but also outside. That's going to help you with your communication, with actually feeling safe. And this slide was only to remind us that, you know, if you think about it, the number 6 will look different depending on from what angle you're looking at. So that in itself should remind you about how you can be compassionate. And it leads us into the next slide and principle, which is that the intent behind the action actually matters. Yes, the impact does. You shouldn't be unkind, for example, or you shouldn't be making mistakes all the time without learning. But understanding the intent behind the action means that you can understand where that came from, and you can then address it. And if you place your certainty in that, you know that you had all the best intentions, you want to do a good job, and yes, you made a mistake because the consequence behind the action was incorrect, you can at least be sure that actually all you wanted to do was to do a good job. So part of that then is all about the education, actually being able to train the mind to think, and not just thinking about what is it that I need to memorize in terms of facts. You can get facts anytime, and facts change as well. But training your attitude is a very different thing. So the 5th thing to think about is to place your certainty on is legacy. So what is it that you're leaving behind? What is it that you're creating? How will you be remembered? And all of that is about the fact that actually, if you know that you're doing something that is important to you, then you are going to feel much more powerful. You are going to feel much more certain about what you're doing, how you're communicating, how you're acting. And just the next slide is just showing you my example of my legacy, which is the fact that my son, who's 7 years old, he can see that I'm creating something that he can be involved in. And last year, for example, we had the Festival of Innovation. We had 200-300 people turning up, actually showing the next generation of kids on how they can innovate. And this is part of the thing. In innovation, you actually have very, very little certainty. And that's the point. So next slide is basically what I'm saying is, when I talked about focus, I meant focus on what matters, focus on what brings value and serves the world, and don't place your sense of certainty in what you don't have control over, which are other people, which are external events, which is your plan. Focus instead on your strategy, not your plan. The plan can change. Having that means that you will have more flexibility. And lastly, last slide, because I appreciate I am probably over. That's me, and I'm inviting you to connect and find out more. I appreciate I had to go through this quite quickly. So I'm going to hand over to you now, AJ.
Yeah, thanks, Laila, for the wonderful session on how to be certain in certain times during uncertain times.
I'm Jenya from organizing team of Agile Network India. I'll help you with the question and answers. So
Thank you.
Vipul Chandra is asking, does a PPT provide psychological safety to a speaker?
Yes, if you place your certainty in your slide. And I was very happy if I needed to present this without the slides, but maybe another speaker would have been much more stressed and you would have seen that person be much more stressed. So if what we're seeking here is to have psychological safety, which means we're not feeling stressed, there is no fear, then yeah, the more we place our certainty and our feeling of safety in external things like a safety blanket, then what I'm advocating for is placing that inwards. So you have that certainty inside, regardless of what happens outside.
Okay, so the next question is from Raj Lingapuri. He is asking,
Mhm.
culture and your upbringing impacts the psychological safety, is it?
Absolutely. That we fear is not to belong. We fear rejection. We fear from not being in a crowd that of like-minded people. Yes, because what the group think is placing safety, what they think is good, might be different from another group of people, whether that's in India, in UK, in the US, etc.
Okay, so the next question is from Shalu. She is saying, what we focus on grows. How do you explain that? If I focusing on trying to solve problem, then what's your opinion? What should grow?
Okay, so this is part of the thing we have been taught from an early age, is that we are problem solvers and we look at the problem and then we focus on what the problem is and then trying to solve that problem instead of actually, and then we dig into the problem much more. One of the things that we can do as an alternative is actually look at, well, how do we make sure that that problem doesn't even exist? How can we actually, what would that world look like? What would that system look like? Um, so, and this is something that I didn't understand until I actually got into the business world, is that actually stop focusing on the problem and start focusing on the solution. What is it that you're trying to do here? Who are you helping? What is this meant to do? And if you focus on that, then the problem is eradicated. It goes away.
Okay, so the next question is from Rakesh Chandra Goel. He's saying that innovation may not be certain, and that is its beauty is the way feeling safe.
So yes, innovation isn't safe because it means going outside of what everyone else thinks. Innovation means seeing things differently and then taking and trusting that actually this is going to provide value. This is something that people want to buy. And you're putting yourself out there. You're putting yourself out there to be essentially judged by people who are not very compassionate. Um, and rejection is something we fear. So the problem is that if we, but that also is the beauty. We have Steve Jobs, we have Jeff Bezos, we have all of these people that has actually innovated and created the products. They place their own certainty on themselves. They bet within themselves that they had something that people couldn't see. So the more we can actually trust in something that we can't see, the more likely it is going to appear.
Okay, so the next question is from Rohit. He's asking how to build a repo in this uncertain times and make sure we have right mental balance between work and personal lives.
Okay, so that's two questions. So if we start with the first bit, which is how do we, sorry, can you say the first bit first?
How to build a rapport in this uncertain time?
Okay, so the rapport is the leadership skill of being able to listen. And that was one of the things I touched on there, that stress or fear, we all act differently, we all behave differently. And if you build up your leadership skills, then essentially it's about listening to what they've got. Go beyond that pattern of behavior that you potentially don't like. You know, if somebody's rude, you don't want to engage with somebody who's rude, but you can have compassion and actually understand what's driving that rude behavior. If you do that, you can maybe uncover something else and you actually can build a rapport. So I'm just using that as an example, but it's with everything. You know, if people are withdrawn, then again, you don't just look at, oh, they don't want to talk. Just give them space and then do something that means that they feel like they're being heard and listened. But that's a completely different um, session. What was the second part, Jenny?
Second part is how to make sure we have a right mental balance between the work and the personal life.
Right. So part of the problem of the pandemic is that it caused us all to work from home and using, and for some people that was new. And if you haven't actually put aside a space, a physical space where you can be and work, then it's very difficult for you to get into work mode. So that was one of the things that, you know, a lot of people had to come to terms. The second thing was, if you have family around, then they need to respect that actually the time is now work time, the time is, and the space that over there is workspace. And this is where also compassion comes in. If they come in because they want to have, you know, and I'm talking about, for example, my son, he had to, you know, very often I had to say to him, look, mom is working right now. But he would still come and want to have a cuddle. So it's sort of, okay, well, yes, here's your cuddle, go away now. I gotta work. So yeah, compassion, and be understanding that others are feeling exactly the same thing. They're all battling different things, but maybe showing their behavior in a different way. Anything else?
So thank you, Laila. Thank you for your session. It was a wonderful learning from you. Great presentation, and you are getting a lot of good comments as well.
Okay, thank you very much.